few minutes prior to their questions. So Ranking Member Scott, I'm pleased to turn it over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, and thank you for your commitment to such an important issue. And to those of you joining us today, we are so thankful that you're here, and we're so thankful that you have led the fight for all of us on this really important issue. There's no doubt that the COVID impact on Alzheimer's and the caregivers was devastating. And frankly, I think about folks in my home state of South Carolina, Karen Shepherd of Monk's Corner, who takes care of her mother. Her mother was diagnosed 8 years ago. Before COVID, she used to have a private sitter that was able to come and help out some so that she could go to her own doctor's appointments. When businesses started shutting down, she lost her respite care. During the first wave of COVID, we saw Alzheimer's and dementia deaths increase by 18% nationwide. Far too many people. Gosh. Last month, I, along with 23 senators, sent a bipartisan letter to Secretary Becerra asking him to target the remaining $23 billion of COVID relief to people with Alzheimer's. Under the previous administration and 2 years prior, funding for Alzheimer's increased by 420%, from $595 million in 2015 to $3.1 billion in 2021. Linda Talbert from Greenville, South Carolina, who lost her husband to this disease at the age of 56, pointed out, this is not, and I love this comment, and Chairman Casey will love it as well, this is not a red issue or a blue issue. This is truly a purple issue. It's the color of the tie that I'm wearing today, and frankly, it's what we both know. It's one of the reasons why this hearing is perhaps one of the more important hearings we'll have all year. We're bringing not a partisan coalition together, we're bringing an American coalition together. The American family is focused on an issue that we know is devastating families throughout this country. And by doing so, we believe that by bringing more attention to this important topic, that we will be able to help bring more resources and more expertise to the table. And we're so thankful that we have the host of panelists, experts that we have to talk about an issue that they have been personally impacted by, and that they continue to strive for solutions to help the next wave of caregivers, the next wave of folks impacted by that. For that, we are eternally grateful for the experts that we have. I'll say that when you think about, Mr. Chairman, as you noted in our last hearing, nearly half of all the people with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's, and nearly 1/3 will be by the age of 50. 70% of women with prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome have abortions. I thank you for recognizing our shared commitment to improving the lives of people with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. When it comes to doing the best with what we have, South Carolina is truly a trailblazer. In 1988, South Carolina launched the nation's first Alzheimer's disease registry, which informs clinical research and planning for medical and social services. While we are leading the fight, we are also in the trenches. South Carolina has the 6th highest death rate for Alzheimer's in our nation. 6th. Patty Yonts of Pawleys Island in 2012, Patty's husband, Howard, was diagnosed with a rare type of Alzheimer's disease that causes severe visual impairment. He sees the world as if he is looking through a broken mirror. Patty is an advocate and a caregiver, and she and Howard just celebrated their 35th anniversary. Happy anniversary, Patty. People like Karen, Linda, Patty, our witnesses today, and all of you joining virtually give us hope. You give me hope. The Alzheimer's Association says the first survivor Alzheimer's is still out there, and I know they are right. And I believe that today's hearing will help us hit the accelerator in that direction. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and working with them to find that first survivor and so many more. Thank you, Chairman.
Ranking Member Scott, thanks very much. We're going to turn to our witness introduction in a moment, but I want to acknowledge the senators who are already in attendance. We know that this is a day when many senators have committee members have a number of hearings at the same time. Some have 3 at the same time, some have 4. I know that Senator Collins is with us, Senator Blumenthal, and I'll turn to Senator Lee, who will do our first witness introduction. Senator Lee.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Scott. It's a real honor to introduce Dr. Mark Supiano, who hails from our great state of Utah. Dr. Supiano is a respected geriatrician and a professor at the University of Utah School of Medicine. He's someone who has spent 30 years providing primary care for older adults. He's the chief of geriatrics and the executive director at the University of Utah Center on Aging. Dr. Supiano's interests stem really from his passion to care for a complex and vulnerable population. He's been regularly cited as among the best doctors in America. As a geriatrician, Dr. Supiano is on the front lines in caring for people with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. His research focuses on the age-related increase in blood pressure, which has emerged as a key link to developing Alzheimer's. He's also a member of the prestigious Alzheimer's Association Research Roundtable, supported by the Bold Infrastructure for Alzheimer's Act, enacted into law in 2018. So thank you, Dr. Supiano, for all of your great work and for being here with us today. We look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee, thanks very much. I know that we're going to have some other introductions, excuse me, by committee members, but I might jump out of order here and turn to Ranking Member Scott for the next introduction.
Thank you, Chairman Casey. I'm pleased to introduce someone who is truly a godsend to Alzheimer's patients and caregivers in the Palmetto State. Peg Laymeyer. Peg is a civic leader in the metropolitan Charleston area and throughout the state of South Carolina, as well as the nation. She is co-founder of the ARC of South Carolina, where she has been the executive director for 25 years. That is awesome. We love that type of longevity and support. In 1996, she first developed the ARC as a community outreach program at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Somerville. She offered respite once a week to families living with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. Over the years, the ARC has expanded by both adding programs, including training police officers and other first responders, and extending its services to underserved areas in both rural and urban South Carolina. Last year, Peg was named Trailblazer of the Year by the Greater Somerville-Dorchester County Chamber of Commerce. Before founding the ARC, Peg and her husband Jim were caregivers for her mother, who had Alzheimer's and moved from Alabama after Peg's father passed away back in 1990. Thank you, Peg, for your important work and for being here with us today. We look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. I'll do the next 2 introductions. And before I do that, I want to acknowledge Senator Rosen, who's joining us, and we'll be acknowledging senators as they appear. I wanted to introduce Dr. Jennifer Manley. She's a professor of neuropsychology at Columbia University in New York City. Her research aims to improve the diagnostic accuracy of neuropsychological tests for detecting cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease among African American and Hispanic elders. Dr. Manley will speak about the nature and progression of Alzheimer's disease and the populations at highest risk for acquiring the disease. Our final witness that I'll introduce is a Pennsylvanian, Caitlin Montanez. Caitlin is a resident of Lancaster County, in particular Ephrata, Pennsylvania. She's a social worker and caregiver to her father, who was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's in 2015. Caitlin will share her father's journey of receiving his diagnosis and accessing much needed supports, including home and community-based services. She's a strong advocate for people living with Alzheimer's disease across the country. Caitlin, thanks for being with us, and we're looking forward to your testimony. We'll now turn to our witnesses for their statements. We'll begin with Dr. Supiano. Dr. Supiano, you may begin your testimony.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the Special Committee on Aging. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to present my perspective on the exciting approaches that are available today, supporting the goal to take aim at Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, or ADRD. In addition to the kind introduction that Senator Lee provided for me in my roles at the University of Utah, I also want to point out that I'm a member of the American Geriatric Society Board of Directors. In my primary care geriatrics medical home clinic, with the support of an interprofessional team of providers, I evaluate patients who present with cognitive concerns, diagnose and treat ADRD, and provide ongoing longitudinal care for these patients and their caregivers. I'm an investigator on 2 NIH-funded clinical trials that are evaluating vascular risk factors for ADRD. And then finally, as Senator Lee mentioned, I'm involved with the Building Our Largest Dementia, or BOLD, Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Risk Reduction. Recent advances in strategies to prevent cognitive impairment and to provide effective dementia management services that incorporate caregivers lead me to offer the following recommendations that take aim at ADRD. First, to promote prevention strategies. Promoting cognitive screening is an important prerequisite to implementing prevention strategies. Creating a dementia-aware society where cognitive screening is normalized will help to reduce the stigma that often accompanies a dementia diagnosis. Requiring validated, objective screening tests of memory and cognition in the Medicare annual wellness visit is one strategy to accomplish this. Implementing public health strategies that target the modifiable dementia risk factors that are the focus of the CDC BOLD infrastructure programs will be critically important. Vascular aging and hypertension have emerged as key actors in the ADRD story, particularly with the good news that the development of cognitive impairment can be prevented with better control of high blood pressure. Since many of the modifiable risk factors disproportionately impact underserved populations who have adverse social determinants of health, approaches to mitigate the impact of these health disparities are urgently needed. Second, to develop a dementia competent workforce. Most dementia care is provided by primary care health professionals. All members of the healthcare team will require education and training to competently evaluate and manage patients with cognitive impairment. In parallel, there's a need to expand the number of geriatrics healthcare professionals, including geriatricians and cognitive specialists, to meet the demands for appropriate diagnosis of patients with dementia. There's a special need to support hands-on caregivers and the direct care workforce in both home and long-term care settings to equip them to care for persons with dementia. This support should ensure living wages, benefits, and paid family leave. Third, support dementia care management programs and family caregivers. There's a pressing need to provide options so persons with dementia can access the right care in the right setting at the right time. Efforts to expand home and community-based services, as Senator Casey was mentioning in the introduction, and making these evidence-based programs such as the care ecosystem and the community aging in place, advancing better living for elders, more broadly available, will help decrease excess healthcare system utilization and avoid premature placements in skilled nursing facilities. The recently introduced bipartisan Comprehensive Care for Alzheimer's Act is designed to support the development and evaluation of dementia care management programs like these. Fourth and finally, to continue to invest in ADRD research. The recent infusion of ADRD research support has already begun to yield important results, identifying effective strategies to prevent and manage ADRD. In parallel with efforts to develop and provide disease-modifying treatments for AD, the importance of implementing existing preventive strategies cannot be overstated. Just a 2-year delay in dementia onset would translate to 2.2 million fewer Americans developing dementia by the year 2040, a 20% reduction. Finally, additional research is needed to identify mechanisms for cognitive resilience, promoting cultural awareness, and addressing the disproportionate impact of health disparities in developing cognitive impairment. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my perspective this morning and these recommendations with you. I look forward to addressing your questions and comments.
Dr. Supiano, thanks for your statement, and we'll now move to Dr. Manley. You may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. Over the last decade, we've seen a tremendous increase in the federal investment for research on Alzheimer's disease, or AD. Thank you. This investment has accelerated our understanding of the heterogeneity of AD and has allowed us to engage a more diverse group of Americans in Alzheimer's research. But little progress has been made in decreasing racial and ethnic disparities in risk or equitable care for those living with AD. Rates of Alzheimer's are higher among African Americans and Hispanics than non-Hispanic whites. And this means that at the same age, a higher proportion of Black and Hispanic older adults live with AD than among whites. More women are affected by AD than men because women live longer and age is the primary risk factor. Women represent about 2/3 of the dementia caregivers in the United States. It's now well established that people who had fewer opportunities to receive education when they were children are at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease later in life. There's evidence that early life residence in a stroke belt state, including states that committee members represent, such as Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, leads to higher risk for AD, even if you move out of the stroke belt. Overall, Alzheimer's disease is underdiagnosed. Only about half of the people who have Alzheimer's disease ever receive a formal diagnosis by a doctor, and these missed diagnoses are more common among Black and Hispanic older adults than among whites. For the past 23 years, I've been an investigator for a community-based longitudinal study of aging and dementia, where I partnered with the African American and Caribbean Hispanic older adults of Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, Inwood, and Harlem in northern Manhattan. My work focuses on understanding why disparities in AD and dementia are maintained and how to narrow or eliminate them. Our research points to historical and contemporary policies that have created unequal access to resources and may increase exposure to stressors throughout life. These conditions get under the skin early in life and account for disparities in AD as people get older. For example, before Brown versus Board of Education and continuing today, racist policies and residential segregation forced Black children to attend underfunded schools that had large student-teacher ratios, lower teacher salaries, and discriminatory disciplinary policies. Many older Americans who live in Washington Heights immigrated from the Dominican Republic, where, especially in the rural areas, there was little governmental investment in education and fewer opportunities for children to go to school or to learn to read or write. My research team found a connection between these early life school policies and later life risk for dementia. People who went to school in counties, states, or countries that invested more resources in schools are at lower risk for cognitive impairment and dementia when they get older. Our research in Washington Heights suggests that investment in schools that serve Black and Hispanic children would narrow inequalities and in dementia in those groups. One of the biggest challenges for families in Washington Heights is that most of the doctors who provide specialized dementia don't speak Spanish. Specialists that are bilingual in Spanish and English have long waiting lists of people who need an assessment. Using an interpreter for any medical visit has limitations, but this is even more of a barrier to quality care when the patient has cognitive deficits. Lack of culturally appropriate resources for dementia diagnoses and care is a key reason why African Americans and Hispanics with dementia are less likely than whites to have a formal diagnosis. Expansion of paid family leave is an equity issue for dementia care and services because people from minoritized backgrounds are more likely to rely on informal and unpaid family caregiving. This has a disproportionate effect on wealth and well-being because people from minoritized backgrounds are less likely to hold a job with paid family leave benefits. many women of color must leave the workforce to take care of loved ones with dementia. The home health care or direct care workforce largely consists of women of color, many of whom have less than a high school education and were born outside the US. Direct care workers earn low wages and experience high turnover. It's time to raise wages and facilitate career advancement opportunities for direct care workers to be consistent with the essential role that these paid caregivers play in the well-being of our society. Thank you.
Dr. Manley, thank you for your testimony. Now we'll turn to Mrs. Lehmeyer.
Good morning. Thank you to the Senate Special Committee on Aging, Chairman Senator Casey and Ranking Member Senator Scott. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Growing up in rural Alabama with older parents and much older siblings, I witnessed how our family and extended family cared for each other and nurtured each other through good times and tough times. These impactful life experiences shaped my life. My family expanded to Summerville, South Carolina with a wonderful husband, 6 children, including stepchildren and an adopted at-risk teenager. My mother was diagnosed at age 76 with Alzheimer's. Multiple visits to Alabama showed the continual decline of both of my parents. My father, age 80, was my mother's caregiver for 8 years when he called and said that he needed help. We moved her to a facility in Montgomery, which was 45 miles away from my dad. It was devastating to both of them. My father died in 1990 at the age of 90. We moved mother to live with us, and I was granted conservatorship. Working full-time, I resigned to become her full-time caregiver. I worked part-time at night, delivering newspapers so I could be home during the day. After discussing the plight and the needs of caregivers to have a break and support, I was asked to start a group social respite program at our church. In January of 1996, the ARC opened its doors. Needing skilled care, my mother moved into Alzheimer's long-term care in 1995, before the ARC actually opened. She died in 1997 at the age of 93. Her legacy lives on through the ARC. I sought every opportunity to speak to anyone, church, civic, businesses, governmental groups, clubs, anywhere I could find an audience. The Alzheimer's Association in Charleston was just starting, and I became involved in many of their educational committees, fundraising, and eventually as a board member. As a previous business person, I believe in the power of the Chamber of Commerce. Becoming a member has opened many doors for support and growth for the ARC. Nonprofits are essential to the community, and building relationships is vital. The ARC provides so much more than respite to 5 counties in the low country of South Carolina. They include 4 respite half-days a week in Summerville, with bus service since 2000, a satellite respite center in Harleyville weekly, 4 support groups in Berkeley and Dorchester counties, 1 for wives only. And also we have an early memory loss program that meets weekly. Our outreach program, the NOAA Project, Neighborhood Outreach Alzheimer's Help, provides education classes, memory screenings, health and resource events, also law enforcement and first responder training, which is evidence-based and certified through South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy. Caregiver workshops and train-the-trainer programs are in person and virtual and include powerful tools for caregivers, which is a 6 weeks evidence-based class, and also the train-the-trainer program for professionals. These versions are also come in Spanish and Korean. All of these services are provided by 5 full-time and 4 part-time staff. They are devoted, passionate, fun-loving, supportive, and caring. In 2018, we acquired a home to move our services from the church and to be able to enable expansion. Through the shutdown and pandemic, our social program closed for 7 months. The staff immediately started calling, emailing caregivers, creating fun activity baskets that were delivered to their home. Zoom was our salvation for our education workshops, memory screenings, and support groups. caregivers and families felt less isolated and connected, and the trainer classes reached as far as Alaska and beyond. When we returned to a full-time program and we saw the decline in our ARC families because of the isolation and lack of socialization. Now we know that our programs are so vital for their well-being. And now we are seeing the effects of dementia to include not only the baby boomers, but also the millennials are experiencing caregiving and some cases of early onset dementia. Funding for grassroots organizations is paramount. Additional state funding for aging services is a critical, especially for Alzheimer's support programs. Families need to afford in-home care as well. With the support of the South Carolina's Office on Aging, we have been able to build our education program, and more funding for aging services is needed as the numbers continue to decrease every day and every minute. Senators, caregiving families need your help, and thank you so much for the help you have given, and Senators, thank you very much for your time.
Mrs. Laymeyer, thanks so much for your testimony. And before I introduce our last witness, I wanted to acknowledge senators, as I said, as they appear. Senator Warnock has been on for a little while, and I missed him earlier, so I want to acknowledge his presence at the hearing. Finally, our fourth witness and final witness is Caitlin Montanez. Caitlin?
Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee about my experiences as a caregiver for my father. I'm a full-time mother, I have a full-time job, and I'm a full-time caregiver. Each of these responsibilities are important. Taking all together, it can be overwhelming. My hope is that in sharing my stories, others who are impacted by this disease and have similar stories feel less alone. I'm a social worker and an advocate for my father and for the millions of Americans who have family or loved ones living with Alzheimer's and other dementia. My father, Louis, was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's at age 54. I was only 22 years old. This year, he turned 61, just 1 year younger than my grandmother, who passed away of the same disease. More than 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. My father's story represents only one set of unique challenges, which individuals and caregivers live with every day. I want to underscore the importance of what this hearing is based around, expanding the support of daily and long-term care needs for people with dementia, which includes the support of caregivers. My father began showing symptoms of Alzheimer's in his early 50s, but he wasn't formally diagnosed until years later in 2015. After he began displaying symptoms my family was familiar with, my parents visited a few providers to see if they could figure out this neurological and other health issues. It took meeting with several doctors before one of them recognized the signs of younger onset Alzheimer's. Prior to his diagnosis, my mother made it her mission to attempt to understand how to navigate the resources that could help my family. My dad was unable to earn a living for his family and just stayed home, confused and disoriented. He had been a custodian at a local school, and now we were faced with difficult new reality. My mom and I were both working full time, and we were unable to provide the 24-hour supervision he needed. The delay in diagnosis and fragmented care he received left us feeling frustrated, alone, and unable to access much needed support and services. It was an incredibly challenging time for us. At first, when he was assessed for home and community-based services, he wasn't eligible because he could still do many things on his own. He actually was denied twice. Since he wasn't able to receive services, my family was constantly concerned about his safety. There have been numerous instances where my father was confused and as a result ended up wandering and becoming lost. Last fall, we were fortunate enough to finally get him Medicaid home and community-based services through the waiver program in Pennsylvania. A medical social worker helped us through the application process, and with the numerous assessments and paperwork that had to be done, it was a game changer for us, but it shouldn't be that hard for people to receive the services they need. My father has been receiving home and community-based services now for about 7 months. I know this committee's hearing today is focused on the importance of these services, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am that we were able to have access to them. We recently had to move my dad to my sister's house because my mom was no longer able to care for him. The services he's receiving give him an aide for about 3 hours a day and Meals on Wheels. When he was living with my mom, the aides would help clean the house, help my dad with breakfast, and even take him on short rides. Now that he's living with my sister, the aides take him on walks and sometimes even bring her dogs along. The aides also come in the evening to give my sister a chance to run errands and just have a break. But we've also run into some issues as well. Right now, my sister hasn't been able to find an aide for my dad because of the high burnout and turnover rates. With someone living with Alzheimer's or dementia, a consistency of care, including who is providing the care, is essential. Being an aide is hard work with little pay. Aides should be paid more for the work they do and have better access to dementia education and training for their workers. If aides received proper training to work with individuals living with Alzheimer's and dementia, they would have the tools they need to help redirect, would understand common behavioral issues, and it could lead to more successful interactions. People living with Alzheimer's have good days and they also have bad days, but better trained aides who get paid higher wages would bring consistency for my dad and a better quality of life for him and my family. Congress has continued to keep Alzheimer's and dementia top mind when working on important issues like home and community-based services. Chairman Casey, I am grateful for your leadership on this important and deeply personal issue. I am a passionate advocate for my dad and for those living with Alzheimer's and other dementia. It's important to me that people living with Alzheimer's, including those who are younger than 60, are able to receive the care and support they need. I will continue to be the voice for the people who have lost theirs. Congress must ensure all communities have access to high quality, culturally appropriate services and supports. Additionally, I respectfully ask you to increase access to home and community based services for individuals living with Alzheimer's and dementia, including individuals living with a younger onset. Please continue to make Alzheimer's research a priority and to work together to pass critical legislation like Comprehensive Care for Alzheimer's Act and the Equity in the Neuroscience and Alzheimer's Clinical Trials. These are the bipartisan priorities I'm advocating for, along with the over 2,000 other advocates that are participating in the Alzheimer's Association and Alzheimer's Impact Movement Advocacy Forum this week. These policies will help other families like mine receive the support and services we all need and deserve to lead to improved research outcomes. Thank you for inviting me to speak, for listening to my story, and for all that you have done. I look forward to answering any questions.
Well, Caitlin, thanks very much for your statement, and we'll now move to questions. I'll start, and then we'll go to Ranking Member Scott. I wanted to start, I guess, with a question both for Mrs. Lehmeyer as well as Caitlin regarding the challenge of this kind of caregiving. This is, as your testimony indicates, and as so many people on this, as part of this hearing, understand, this is hard work. This is, I've never done it myself, but I can get some sense of it listening to your testimony. And it's also deeply personal. In many cases, individuals taking care of a close family member, a parent or someone very close to them. We know that long-term care services can ease the burden on the caregiver. We also know that most people want to receive those kinds of services, and they need those services and supports in their homes for as long as they possibly can. But it is hard work. So I wanted to ask both of you, and maybe we'll start with Mrs. Lehmeyer. Do you believe that families need more support at home? I know that's kind of a broad question, but can you speak to that? I think you're muted.
I thought I had
There you go.
unmuted. I apologize. Definitely, listening to Caitlin's story and seeing how their family has worked together to make that happen, but also, you know, the caregivers burnout is just unbelievable if they don't have help. And, you know, the community long-term care services, the area agencies on agings, you know, have the ability to provide vouchers for in-home services, but they're very limited. They can also provide vouchers for caregivers to be able to access respite programs like the ARC. But again, they're very limited ways that they, and vouchers, I should say, limited vouchers available to the family. So they may only get a voucher for 12 visits. Well, that's only once a month, and the caregiver needs more than that in respite. Also, looking at our Medicaid system so that there's a higher reimbursement for providing care in the home or in a facility to help these families if they do have to make that long-term care decision. I know when my mother was admitted to the Life Care Center that did have an Alzheimer's unit, at that time they were accepting Medicaid. Since the numbers are growing and with Alzheimer's and such, and more people are aging, they finally pulled their Medicaid reimbursement contract and became long-term care paid. So I was fortunate to get in under that wire, but there's so many facilities that are needed to be able to accept Medicaid for the care of Alzheimer's patients. And I would encourage a look at that possible scenario to determine more help for families that have to make that long-term care decision, ways to be able to have them in a quality facility that understands ADRD. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Caitlin?
I do agree as well. I believe we do need more resources within the home and services. I think the challenges and the different uncertainties that my family and I experience were very troublesome and very difficult to work through. Like I stated in my testimony, the countless paperworks, the countless calls just to get my father's services, especially since he is so young with Alzheimer's, was just very difficult. So my hope is to see changes, especially for the younger people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, to be able to have that prevention implemented immediately once the diagnosis, once the person is diagnosed. I think it will help family members just ease the burden. Just to have that extra support. Like I said in my testimony, those 3 hours a day from my sister have been a blessing. Could we, use more and need more? Of course. But I guess we have to start somewhere. And yes, thank you.
Thanks so much. Ranking Member Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it would be appropriate for me to perhaps yield my time to the former Chairwoman Collins, who's actually the founder of the Senate Alzheimer's Task Force. So, Senator Collins, if you would be willing to take the first question since you've earned the right to do so, I would really appreciate hearing from you first.
Senator Scott, thank you so much for your typical graciousness. In just a few minutes, the Health Subcommittee, of which I'm the ranking member, is holding a hearing on healthcare workers shortages. So it's very relevant to a lot of the issues that we're talking about. I am the founder and co-chair of the Senate Alzheimer's Task Force. And for many, many years, I chaired this annual hearing. And it feels so strange to not be chairing it now, but I know that with Senator Scott and Senator Casey, that the committee is in great hands. So thank you for your graciousness. Alzheimer's is our most costly disease, and it also exacts such a tremendous human toll, not just on the victims, but on the entire family. Caitlin, I was really moved by your testimony and what you're doing to take care of your dad while you take care of your children, you're working, and how difficult that is. In my own family, Alzheimer's has claimed my father, 2 of my uncles, my grandfather, cousins. It's unfortunately very widespread. And I watched my mother heroically take care of my father at home for 8 years before he went into the veterans home. And it was just so difficult, even with a little help from family members, but it was really hard to access care. There's an issue that Caitlin raised that I want to ask Dr. Supiano about. She mentioned the delayed diagnosis for her father. And according to a survey by the Alzheimer's Association, 22% of primary care doctors said that they had no residency training in dementia diagnosis and care. And of those who did undergo training, 65% said that it was very little. Legislation that I authored to reauthorize the Geriatrics Workforce Enhancement Program and reinstate the Geriatrics Academic Career Awards Program was signed into law as part of the CARES Act. But Doctor, I would like to hear from you your thoughts on how medical education programs can be improved to better prepare our healthcare workforce to serve Alzheimer's patients.
Well, Senator Collins, first, thank you for your leadership on this very important matter and supporting the work that the Senate has done related to Alzheimer's disease, and also with the Health Care Act, and particularly with your support for the Geriatric Workforce Enhancement Program and the Geriatric Academic Career Award programs. Full disclosure, I am funded through the Utah Geriatric Education Center, and I'm presenting to our group who's holding their retreat later today. So we thank you very much for that ongoing support. To respond to your question specifically about how we can further address the education deficit in dementia care, and for that matter, to extend it further to really geriatric care. I have been invested in medical education throughout the 30 years of my career in academic geriatrics, and we continue to pursue efforts in really two prongs. First, to certainly promote the growth and development of more geriatric healthcare professionals. That's what the GWEP and the GACA programs are designed to do, and expansion of those programs would certainly address that component. The second prong is to increase geriatrics and dementia education for all trainees across all health professions. And to that end, aligning the funding for graduate medical education, which, as you know, comes from Medicare, comes from CMS, aligning the education dollars that support graduate medical education with competencies in geriatrics and dementia care would be a really important step in that direction. So yes, there are specific targets that we would love to see to enhance the training for all healthcare professionals. The final point I make is really educating all primary care providers who are currently in practice, as well as the society, as I mentioned in my opening statement, creating a dementia-aware society and normalizing cognitive screening for everyone. And to that end, requiring an objective assessment of cognitive function as part of the Medicare annual wellness visit would be another approach to address the need that you have so appropriately identified.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Scott, for allowing me to go early so that I can race off to my other hearing. But this is such an important issue and near and dear to my heart. And Ms. Montanez, I know that you too are a caregiver, and my heart goes out to you as you try to balance everything also. So I want to thank all four of the excellent witnesses that are here today. And please be assured that I'm going to continue to work hard till one day we have a means of prevention, effective treatments, and ultimately a cure for this devastating disease. It's just so important. Thank you all. Thanks so much.
Senator Collins, thanks very much. And we well remember those hearing rooms packed with people for this hearing every year. This year it's virtual, of course, but we know a lot of people are connecting. Just to give you a sense of order, we'll go to Senator Gillibrand next, and then I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott. Senator Gillibrand, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry to not have been present for my introduction. I was unaware of the timing, so I apologize. But I want to thank everyone for the countless hours, dedication, and work that we have done to lift up the voices of our Alzheimer's community. I also want to thank the caregivers for their countless hours, dedication, and mental and physical toll that they have given, because as caregivers, they give so much. According to the Alzheimer's Association, nearly 83% of the help provided to older adults in the United States comes from family members, friends, and unpaid caregivers. And so while caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's is rewarding in its own right, it can also be stressful, bringing physical and mental challenges and health challenges for caregivers who are often overlooked and they're not addressed. So for Mrs. Montanez, thank you for sharing your story. As a caregiver, what has been your biggest challenge in addressing and facilitating care for your loved one? And are there support services or resources that you wish you had known about or had access to earlier in the process?
Thank you for your question. I would say the most challenging experience that that we walked through would be just not having access to services immediately. Like I said in my testimony, my dad was very, very young, so I can just remember the countless calls I made to Office of Aging, and being told, call back when he turned 60. When he turned 60, he would be guaranteed services. And unfortunately, we couldn't wait until he was 60 years old. And when my mom went into the hospital, that's when he got services because he was considered an abandoned person. So I would just wish that he received services, whether it was like Meals on Wheels or even an aid years ago, just to have interactions and have those social interactions that he desperately needed. Because within those first few years, he was just home alone a lot of the time. And myself, I was in graduate school, and then my mom was working full time.
Thank you. For Professor Manley, welcome. I'm so glad you were able to be one of our expert witnesses today. What resources do you think are needed most to ensure caregivers of people with Alzheimer's are in the best position to provide support and care for their loved ones while also ensuring their own well-being?
Thank you for that question, Senator Gillibrand. I think that our research actually suggests that investment in neighborhoods, in housing, and in healthcare in racial and ethnic communities that are underserved and advancing racial equity in institutions would have a positive impact on some of the issues that you raised. Essentially, we need to focus on the neighborhood or local level, increasing options for families that are seeking dementia services in the places that they live. This means potentially getting the best minds together to innovate and broaden dementia care options in neighborhoods where there's a higher impact of dementia, and also incentivizing dementia specialists to practice in these communities. This will help us narrow dementia care inequalities. We found in our research that telehealth was the way for us to get a hold of people in these communities, and this would also help people get the care in the home where they need it. But underserved communities need the devices and they need the connectivity that's required for this tool to work. And this is because Early and accurate diagnosis of dementia is at the core of provision of dementia services, but in underserved communities, there are fewer resources to refer patients to dementia care professionals. So I think we talked about earlier, investment in training programs that graduate qualified, culturally competent behavioral health professionals with specialty training in dementia would help to narrow some of these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manley, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this excellent hearing.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I'll turn now to Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing again, because I tell you what, I am learning a lot from the witnesses. And Ms. Lehmeyer, thank you for your 25 years of work and dedication, frankly, your passion that is seen through the ARC. A couple of questions for you. Some of the comments that you've made that I find very interesting is the importance of nonprofits like yours working with other organizations within the community. I found it heartening to see that you were really helping to educate and inform law enforcement and train law enforcement, because I know so often the calls that go out when someone's lost or missing is going to be responded to by a law enforcement officer. And so making sure that our first responders have that really important training so that the person who's being approached gets a little more sensitivity, gets a different approach, because it's really not a law enforcement matter, but we have, someone has to have that sense of responsibility and urgency to go find that person. Tell me how and you worked to build those community ties that led to the type of cooperation that you're seeing in our low country community in South Carolina.
Thank you, Senator Scott, for that question. Part of our NOAA project is that outreach help, and we have worked with about 20 different communities across the state within the last 15 years or so to build programs within support programs within their communities, whether it be a support group or a respite center, or just training and inviting us back and back and back to do more education in the community. We feel education is really the key to being able to access caregivers and educate them about what there are about resources and services that we can bring into the communities that they're not even aware of. And the way we do that is we normally will go and talk to the community leaders, the mayor, the bank president, the ladies guild at the churches, or whoever we can gather together, and then sit down to the table with them. And oftentimes we've been requested to come to a community to do that. I know the mayor of St. George had done that many years ago, and so we sat down to the table with all the faith leaders and civic and clubs and business leaders, and said, we don't go in with a cookie cutter approach. We go in and we sit down at the table and say, what do you feel like your families that are living with dementia or having needs as caregivers, regardless of whether it's dementia or not, what do you feel that your community needs? And then sometimes they do say, well, we would like to have a support group. And oftentimes that's how it all begins, is through, excuse me?
Yes, ma'am. I'll say yes, ma'am.
Okay. So a lot, and then that grows into a respite program where they can come to a day program, socialize, and the caregiver can get a break. And then we have the health fairs with all types of screenings, including memory screenings. And so we will work with that community as long as they need us, and
Yes, ma'am.
And go forward with that. And so that's the key, is finding those people in that community that make things happen, and then go from there.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Dr. Supiano, let me hop to you with my last minute or so. And one of the things you talked about is the importance of the comorbidities, the fact that I live in what they call the stroke belt. Second leading cause of death in South Carolina is heart disease. And I'll say this, you have brought or at least illuminated the importance of the issue of these comorbidities that really work against the patient who then develops Alzheimer's. In your research, hypertension and Alzheimer's, how can we help inform, educate patients to seek the diagnosis and or get more information about the Alzheimer's component, where the hypertension, you might be driven to the doctor. With Alzheimer's, sometimes we just ignore some of the symptoms. It seems to me that that's a really important intersection for patients, especially in communities like South Carolina and the minority communities that have a higher incidence of hypertension or diabetes too.
So, Senator Scott, you're exactly right. We have a lot of work to do, frankly, to improve those risk factors across the country, but particularly in parts of the country that are affected by these health disparities and that have very high cardiovascular risk factors, as you point out, of high blood pressure and diabetes. I think part of that messaging for us is that we now have evidence that what is good for the heart is good for the brain. So if we can get the message across that addressing your blood pressure level or your diabetes or your level of cholesterol can be important to protect your brain health down the road, not only prevent the heart attack or stroke. I think that's part of the messaging that we need to communicate to the healthcare system as well as to society to help really address the epidemic of those risk factors, the epidemic of obesity for the similar reasons.
Yes.
So what's good for the heart is good for the brain.
Chairman Casey, I know I'm over time, so let me just say this very quickly. I do think that I'd love to have another hearing on the marketing and the strategies necessary to make sure that our communities have more information about the important information being shared with the panelists. Thank you so much.
Ranking Member Scott, thank you very much. Now we'll turn next to Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all the work that this committee has done over the years to bring attention to Alzheimer's. I also want to say thank you to the families who are impacted by this devastating disease, who have come to be with us today to advocate for progress. You know, here in Congress, it is our responsibility to do everything we can to find a cure. In 30 years, experts estimate that spending on Alzheimer's will increase to more than $1 trillion to pay for doctor's visits, medications, emergency departments, hospital admissions, skilled nursing facility care. Even today, Americans spend an estimated $305 billion a year caring for people with Alzheimer's, but the National Institute of Health spends just 1% of that amount on Alzheimer's research. Providing continued enhanced funding is a critical weapon in our fight against this disease. So let me start with you, Dr. Supiano. We spend far too little on Alzheimer's research, but I'd like to understand more about the impact that even that small amount of funding has had. What scientific advances and improvements have been made as a result of the federal research dollars that we've spent?
Yes, thank you, Senator Warren, for that question, and thank you for your advocacy for enhancing Alzheimer's disease research and research in biomedical science in general. So your point is well taken, but the investment that has been made, as I said in my testimony, the infusion of support over the last several years has resulted in dramatic advances. We now are aware that there are effective strategies to prevent the development of cognitive impairment. We also know, and related to the focus today on caregiving, that there are effective dementia care management programs that incorporate caregivers that have been shown to decrease healthcare utilization and prevent early nursing home placements. So these investments are important. You're also aware, and I know last year this committee heard testimony from Dr. Richard Hodis, the director of the National Institute on Aging, and the investment that has been made in the basic biology of Alzheimer's disease and the genetics of Alzheimer's disease is also bearing fruit. We're on the cusp, hopefully, of being able to offer the first disease-modifying drug for Alzheimer's disease. We have a lot more work to do, but thanks to the infusion of support that has been made to date, these advances are now available and they're ready to be implemented. I think now is our chance to provide the support to now implement these particular strategies now that we know that they're effective.
Right. Well, that is powerfully important. Federal funding helps drive innovation and it helps move us that much closer to a cure. You know, in the last 10 years, the federal government has increased funding for Alzheimer's and dementia research, but it's still not enough. Meanwhile, the coronavirus pandemic upended biomedical research across the country, which has led to delays in critical studies. Dr. Supiano, has the coronavirus pandemic impacted the work of scientists and researchers who are studying Alzheimer's?
Yes, thank you, Senator Warren. And to a certain extent, the scientific community is not immune from the effects of the pandemic and the way that it has altered the way that we go about our business, in this case, biomedical investigation. To the search to, yes, and some delays are apparent in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, then the impact of the pandemic on recruitment into those trials and being able to conduct those trials safely has certainly had a delay. And to that end, getting even more support now to make up for that lost time and accelerate advances going forward will be even more important as we now emerge from the pandemic, thankfully. But that said, as you pointed out, medical scientists are innovators, and we have learned a lot through the pandemic. So to be able to conduct pragmatic trials that can be done remotely, applying virtual telehealth technologies to medical research is another opportunity and another advancement that has been made. So there are some benefits from what we've been living with in the last year that while there have been delays, we have still been able to make progress in this fight against Alzheimer's disease and related dementias.
Well, I know that biomedical researchers have made valiant efforts to innovate and to keep these studies going during the pandemic, but this just underscores the need for more federal support. That's why I will soon be introducing the National Biomedical Research Act, a bill that would invest $100 billion over 10 years in research at NIH and FDA. This is the funding that could be used to fund breakthrough treatments for Alzheimer's or to find ways to slow the progression of the disease. I appreciate the work that you have been doing. I know that no amount of research funding can make up for the heartbreak of losing a loved one to Alzheimer's, but research funding can help prevent the heartbreak for many other families down the line. So I am very hopeful that my colleagues in the Senate will join me in supporting the National Biomedical Research Act. Let's get this one done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. We'll turn next to Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions, both for Dr. Supiano. I've had a bill out there called the Promising Pathways Act, and it's for diseases just like Alzheimer's, ALS, and we spent so much money over the years, I think sevenfold over recent times, on Alzheimer's. It's had one of the highest failure rates of any ailment and attempts to try to get something to work. I think you talked about earlier, there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline that looks promising. Does it make sense on like ALS, Alzheimer's, that we try to pick up the pace for the folks that are in the clinical trials, especially where there is, signs of promise that you're making some headway, and do it a little differently than what you would do on something that has effective therapies out there, looking for new or refining. So you think that would make sense with Alzheimer's specifically, to try to have a different paradigm for getting some of these promising therapies to the marketplace to help folks that have no other options?
So yes, thank you, Senator Braun. I agree with you that given the devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease in particular, that anything we can do to speed the development and implementation of disease-modifying therapies will pay dividends. So and in addition to that, as you pointed out, I believe that the timing is right. Given the investment that's been made in the last several years in these basic understandings of Alzheimer's disease, and as you point out, ALS, investigators here, my colleague in the Department of Neurology, the chair of the department, Dr. Stefan Pulst, has just recently identified a very promising therapy for ALS that you may be familiar with. So yes, based on these medical advances, I think the time is now right to be able to move this forward.
Would you and others in the field be willing to have a discussion with the FDA, who would have to be behind that idea? Because in my attempts to do so, you generally get interest in it, and then it goes back to the paradigm of that normal format and sequence. And I'm okay with that, other than in places where you have no other options. Is that something you'd be willing to engage with them on?
Yes, Senator Braun, and many of us in the geriatric research community have been closely working with the FDA, and not only in this area, but in others. And the regulatory aspects of therapies like this, as it relates to older individuals, are really important. It is all the more important to make sure that older adults are included in the trials that are being done, so that we can generalize the results. So this communication with the FDA is important, and yes, we would love to partner with you to advance that area.
Very good. My second question would be on any disease, rather than treating it, ideally we'd love to prevent it. And I know that there are kind of related discussions on cardiovascular issues, even depression on the mental health side of things. Do you think eventually we're going to find a way to prevent it? Or do you think resources should be put into therapies to treat it? And obviously, I think we'd probably want to do both. I'd love your opinion on what you think might be the best placement of our resources currently, when it's been so elusive on either one of them.
So you're correct, Senator Braun. We need both. The disease-modifying therapy advances, as we just discussed, are critical. I will point out, though, that we do now have evidence basis that much of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias can be effectively prevented. The BOLD initiative that I mentioned, the public health initiative on dementia risk reduction, has been reviewing what have been identified as 12 potentially modifiable risk factors. Most of these are lifestyle effects. We've already talked about some of them: obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, poor nutrition, limited education, and down the list. We know that those are effective strategies. The Lancet Commission, in their report from last year, suggested that attending to those 12 modifiable risk factors would prevent 40% of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So my point would be that we know what these strategies are. We need to better implement them. We need to make sure that they're being addressed across health disparities. As I responded to Senator Scott's question earlier, the need to address the cardiovascular risk factors in areas of the country where these are extremely high. So we do know what's effective. We just need to invest in public health measures now that will help us do better to modify those risk factors. Prevention, I think, is worth an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, I gather.
Yep. Well, very good. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Senator Braun. We'll turn next to Senator Lee.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. You know, most of us have a loved one, or we at least know someone whose loved one has experienced the difficulties of Alzheimer's. In Utah, there are more than 300,000 people aged 65 and older, and as many as 1 in 10 of them have Alzheimer's disease, a higher rate than most other states. The number of Utahns with Alzheimer's who are 65 and older is expected to increase by as much as 40% over the next 5 years. Thankfully, Utah's taking proactive steps to address Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Dr. Supiano, can you tell me about some of the ways in which Utah is leading the country in Alzheimer's research and treatment, and tell us a little bit about how Utah's state plan for Alzheimer's disease and related dementia is contributing to this effort?
Yes, thank you, Senator Lee. And as you've pointed out, Utah does have a very high rate of Alzheimer's disease. in our state. It is a byproduct of the good longevity that we have. So the strongest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias is advancing age. So with the great life expectancy in our state, we can expect to have more cases of Alzheimer's disease as time goes on, all the more reason to focus on these preventative strategies as I was just discussing. So you're correct that we are very fortunate that our state legislature has supported the implementation of the Utah State Plan for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. There is now, I believe, $1 million as a line item coming every year to the Department of Health to implement this strategy. It calls, for example, for enhancing screening for cognitive impairment across the state, so a dementia-aware state. It calls for some of the workforce needs that we've been discussing this morning. It calls for a further investment in Alzheimer's research, and it also calls for supporting community organizations, as we heard from Mrs. Lehmeyer in South Carolina, working hand in hand with community organizations and AAAs is another part of the state plan. So with that, and also with the support that we have through the Utah Governor's Commission on Aging, we're really poised to advance these programs that address Alzheimer's disease and related dementias across the state. The final aspect of this that I'm really excited about and relevant to today's hearing is the focus on caregiving. So as part of the Center on Aging that I direct at the University of Utah, we've made an investment, and thanks to funding from the National Institute on Aging, to our College of Nursing, and to Dr. Lee Ellington, we have support for a caregiving coalition that will focus on supporting the research and implementation we need to help better support family caregivers, particularly those with dementia. So we're really well poised in Utah, Senator Lee, to with the support that we have from the state legislature of the Department of Health, and with the research support from the University of Utah, and the support that we have from NIH, that we are poised to make these advances.
Thank you so much, Dr. Supiano. Mrs. Lehmeyer, in your testimony, you speak about the personal experiences and sacrifices that you made in caring for both your mother and your father, and how that led you to found ARC of South Carolina. My own mother-in-law, Carol Burr, passed away just about a year ago after a long and heroic battle with Alzheimer's disease. So I know firsthand some of the difficulties this disease brings both to the patient and to the loved ones of a patient. The services that you and your colleagues provide really exemplify the value of everyday individuals stepping up to serve those in need. And as you put in your testimony, the nonprofits are essential to the community, and I couldn't agree more. So, Mrs. Lehmeyer, given your experience at the ARC of South Carolina, what can individuals across the country do to better serve and provide relief to those in their communities who are struggling with Alzheimer's, dementia, or the possibility of being a better caregiver?
Thank you, Senator Lee, for that question. As you say, nonprofits are essential because we can provide so many services much more economical and affordable for families because we are nonprofit. We rely on donations and grants and state funding coming down from the area agency on aging and the South Carolina Aging. But I would just encourage families to reach out to, as I did with our church, or reach out to an organization and ask for if they can help build a program similar to the ARC. You know, for 25 plus years, I have spoken to a lot of states and communities across the nation at different conferences and things that I've been to and attended as a presenter. And there is a network of respite care centers across the nation funded through Brookdale National Group Respite Foundation. And I would encourage communities to reach out and to that organization and find out about starting a respite center or other type of caregiver services, talking, getting together with support groups and things like that, and then just building from there, because there is going to be someone in that community that will be a leader and will step up to the plate. But the support needs to be there to help them do that. And I have found that the Chamber of Commerce and some of our other healthcare partners that provide care and support to families are more than willing to join the cause. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
Thank you
very
for the
much so.
question.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see my time's expired.
Senator Lee, thank you very much. And we'll now turn to Senator Rick Scott.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. First off, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I want to thank Chairman for putting this important hearing together, discuss a pretty big issue for my home state of Florida. As you all know, Florida has a significant aging population, and so many of our residents and families have been affected by this heartbreaking and life-altering disease. During my time as governor, I finished in the end of 18. I was governor from 11 to 18. We were able to invest record funding in the Alzheimer's disease initiative. In my last year, actually, we did $26 million just in state funding for education and support services for patients and their caregivers. We established the Ed and Ethel Moore Alzheimer's Disease Research Program, which supports research for better prevention, diagnosis, treatments, and cures for Alzheimer's disease, and provides grants to Florida researchers, which was important. Our state is also the proud home of the Byrd Alzheimer's Center and Research Institute, which is the world's largest freestanding research institution dedicated to Alzheimer's. They're actually launching a new podcast series this week to provide information for caregivers. We also have the Florida Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which coordinates efforts from several universities. We try to do that with a variety of things, including cancer, Alzheimer's, to get our universities that are doing research and our hospitals to coordinate their research. Right now, this group is doing a long-term study with hundreds of members of our Hispanic population, many of them that were Spanish as their primary language, to see how we can better address the issues for the minority population. So we're able to do a lot, but as we all know, there's a lot left to do. Dr. Manley, my understanding is Medicare has a yearly wellness visit benefit, which includes a cognitive impairment assessment. Do you think that's sufficient? Do you think it's doing a good job of catching signs of Alzheimer's, or does it need to be modified?
Thank you for that question, Senator. And I'm very familiar with the researchers and research facilities that you mentioned that are doing very good work in the state of Florida. I think that the annual wellness exam is one important step to incentivizing primary care physicians to do cognitive screening. I think that one major challenge that we've had is that this kind of work, early diagnosis and screening for cognitive impairment takes time. It takes time and it takes training. Some of the instruments that we have available take time to administer. And I think one limitation that we've faced is that the healthcare professionals that are administering this annual wellness exam, many of them do not speak the languages of the patients. So in your state of Florida, in my state of New York, there's a greater burden of cognitive impairment among people who are Hispanic. This is because when Dr. Supiano mentioned the 12 modifiable risk factors that drive risk for Alzheimer's disease, these risk factors are socially determined. They have their roots in life course inequalities. And that's why minoritized populations bear a greater burden of Alzheimer's disease. So as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we've got to, I think, incentivize training programs that are based in communities where people speak the language of the folks who are disproportionately burdened by this disease, in order to and incentivize them to practice in the neighborhoods where these patients live. And that means that the annual wellness exam gives us this structure for assessing and screening, but we need the cultural competency of the practitioners, and we need to do a better job of having our healthcare system earn the trust of the communities that they serve. Thank you.
Thank you. To anybody that would like to answer this, elder abuse is a serious problem for seniors, from physical abuse to financial abuse, and both of those things clearly happen in each of our states. So what do you all recommend as a better way to protect our seniors with Alzheimer's who may not even remember the abusive actions or who it was from strangers, family, and caregivers?
Well, Senator Scott, this is Mark Supiano. I'm happy to jump into that. You've raised a very important concern for protecting all older adults, but particularly those who have cognitive impairment from both physical and financial abuse. For the financial fraud perspective, one of the key education components for patients and their families who are presenting with cognitive impairment is to be proactive about identifying financial protections for that patient, to put firewalls around their financial assets so that they are protected from people that might take advantage of their limited cognitive abilities. So being proactive and as part of a dementia care team of interprofessionals who can would often include a social worker that can help patients and their families set up those appropriate protections for their financial assets would do a huge step in the right direction for preventing the financial abuse.
Thank you. And Chairman, thanks again for holding this hearing.
May I add, Senator Scott,
absolutely.
may I add something to that?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Or we over, I'm sorry, we're over, I see that. I can not do it. Our probate courts are here in South Carolina are wonderful with counseling with families and helping families get a conservatorship or a guardianship in case there is a family member trying to take advantage of a care receiver. And I always recommend elder law attorneys and especially our probate court here in Dorchester County is phenomenal with helping families protect the individual.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, thanks very much. I just want to let everyone know where we are, what we'll do now. I'll turn to a second round of questions that I have and Ranking Member Scott may have. We may go back to the first round for a senator who's likely to return, but let me go back to Dr. Manley. I was noting in the materials for your testimony, some of your background, just a remarkable scholarship, 185 peer-reviewed articles that have contributed insights into disparities in dementia across racial and ethnic groups. So like a lot of folks on this panel, you've spent a lot of time on these issues. I wanted to cite for you, Dr. Manley, a report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine this past February, which said, quote, "To live well with dementia, people need care, services, and supports that reflect their values and preferences, that build on their strengths and abilities, promote well-being, and address needs that evolve as cognitive impairment deepens," unquote. So said the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Our discussion this morning clearly shows we have a ways to go to achieve this goal. Closing the disparities gap in Alzheimer's disease for African American and Hispanic adults must, of course, be part of this discussion. So, Dr. Manley, here's the question. Can you say a few words about what more needs to be done to ensure that all people with dementia and their caregivers can live well for as long as possible and that no one group is left behind? Where do we go from here? And I know in your testimony, I guess it's on page 7, you offer a series of recommendations, but just on this part of your testimony and of course your scholarship, what would you recommend?
Thank you, Senator Casey. So I think the first thing I would recommend is something that we've been talking about throughout the morning, which is the investment in research in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. I think that we've noted some of the ways that that investment has really transformed the research space for Alzheimer's disease. And one way that it has done that is by leveraging studies that were already existing that had been very successful in reaching some of the populations that experience disparities in Alzheimer's disease. But these studies had done that for other diseases like hypertension, like diabetes. And so these studies are now being, I think converted is a little strong of a word, but being utilized to study Alzheimer's disease. In order to do that, the Alzheimer's researchers have had to be very innovative to innovate screening measures, cognitive screening measures that can be incorporated into those studies. A lot of those measures need to be done over the phone because these studies are national studies. A lot of these studies need to employ people all over the country to go out and take blood and do in-person assessments for those participants. So I think that we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation that gets to people where they live, and that's really the key part of the other recommendation that I have about improving care for minoritized populations and making sure that these populations are not left behind, as you mentioned, which is that the neighborhood level is where we need to focus, the local level. I think that what we're finding is that families need options. Dementia is a long course, and those options change as the disease changes. So what this means is incentivizing different stages of care and services in the neighborhoods so that they're available where people live. And we know that some neighborhoods have high proportions of Black and Hispanic people who are living with Alzheimer's disease. We know that from the studies I mentioned before. So that those are my recommendations, Senator.
Doctor, thanks very much. I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all once again for being here. And let me just say to both of our staffs who have spent a lot of time putting this hearing together, I am impressed by the quality, the caliber of our witnesses. I'm impressed by the way that this naturally flows. And I want to say thank you to my Aging Committee staff as well as to yours that just put a lot of time and energy into an important topic. This could be the most expensive disease our nation ever sees. And so spending quality time discussing this issue should not be overlooked. So thank you for your leadership on that issue. As we say oftentimes, in a former life, I sold long-term care policies. So I recognize the importance of funding some of the priorities that we have, especially on Alzheimer's and other related dementia diseases, that this is in fact something that we're going to have to get our arms around, the funding of the help for providing for this important disease. And so I'd ask the whole panel, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the insurance business and long-term care, but B, I know that what we don't do very well is market the importance of making decisions when you're in your 40s about acquiring some of the policies when they're really affordable. Of course, when you're in your 60s, that's a different conversation, but still an important conversation. I know that my mother at her work, she works as a nurse's aide. She's a caregiver and has been to my grandmother who passed away with dementia. as well as my grandfather just 4 years ago, and as a 47-year practitioner of providing assistance and care. One of the options that she has was buying a long-term care policy at work. And I would love to know, do you all think we're doing a good job on marketing and informing the public on the importance of making that decision in their 40s while it's affordable? Or B, I know that it's not the only answer, because for some families, we all recognize that it would just not be affordable, perhaps in any budget. But I do think that this is an important issue and a part of the solution that we haven't spent a lot of time on, as you could probably are all already aware. That I think that we need to do a better job of informing, educating, marketing in communities that could benefit from more information and more knowledge, not just on what Medicaid does, because we typically get there at the end and not at the beginning. But there are some things that we can do from a preemptive standpoint. So for the whole panel, I'd love to hear your recommendations or suggestions from a marketing standpoint. If you don't want to talk about the long-term care insurance component, on making sure that we have enough information coming into communities, whether we should be doing field hearings, frankly, in our states, in the communities where there's a high concentration. I just think this is such an important issue that sometimes more information leads to better education, that leads to better outcomes, and then that reduces the spending trajectory that we're on. I'll stop, and I know you have 2 doctors and 2 amazing caregivers, so I'll stop and shut up and listen. And if you'll turn your microphone on.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator Scott. Very important issue, and I'll confess I am not competent to fully delve into the healthcare economics of the long-term care insurance market, as you say, and how this could be better promoted at younger ages when it would be more affordable. I think you've correctly stated that for the majority of our citizens who are saddled with education debts on their own or for their children and all the other demands of on their household economics, that long-term care insurance is perhaps down on those priorities. Perhaps the solution, so I don't have the healthcare economics solution in that respect, and I'm not equipped with enough information about how to address that need for long-term care insurance specifically. Perhaps, though, a more general solution, whether long-term care services are being paid for by the insurance industry or by the government through Medicaid or Medicare, perhaps the solution is to do what we can to find models of care that are more affordable ways of providing long-term care services and supports. For example, we know that the most expensive spectrum of that care is in skilled nursing facilities or nursing homes. So any strategies that we could invest in early on by supporting people and advancing the home-based and community services that we've been talking about this morning. Programs that I mentioned in my testimony, the care ecosystem, the capable model, PACE programs, other things like this, to find more cost-effective ways to deliver long-term care services and supports in the home on the front end to avoid those perhaps ultimate necessary stays in long-term care. Perhaps lowering the ultimate cost of long-term care services and supports is where we should be focusing our attention, and then we can address who the appropriate funder for that should be. That would be my take on this.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure if I have time, Chairman, for another question, but I'll just go ahead until I see someone. I see Senator Rosen's with us. I'm not sure if she's prepared to go now or not. Are you ready? She said she's shaking her head yes, so I'll stop again talking. This is interesting. All right, sir. Thank you for sending those very obvious cues to stop talking. Senator Rosen.
Well, Ranking Member Scott, thank you, and we'll turn to Senator Rosen.
Thank you. You know, that's the challenge of zooming in. We're all running back and forth. So thank you. And this is really a really important hearing. My mother-in-law was on the Alzheimer's spectrum before she passed, and I know firsthand how important everything all the work that's going on here and the caregiving that it takes and what it feels like to be a family member going through this. And so currently, 1 in 9 Nevadans older than 65 live with Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately, Nevada also has the 3rd fastest growing dementia population in the United States. And so to respond to the challenges that Alzheimer's disease is imposing on our state and of course all around this country, Nevada's universities and research partners have stepped up in a big way. For example, the UNLV Center for Transformative Neuroscience, they recently received a $3 million grant from the National Institute on Aging, which will help them publish their annual review of Alzheimer's medications in the development stage. Additionally, the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health in Las Vegas also received $3 million NIA grant to establish the Nevada Exploratory Alzheimer's Disease Center, which is going to help fill in existing research gaps in how people living in rural areas all across this country might experience Alzheimer's disease. So Dr. Supiano, can you talk to us a little bit about how the current lack of research on rural patients living with Alzheimer's, the challenges they may have getting supportive care to help them treat the disease or cope with it and their family members? What might this impact smaller communities and populations? And how do you think the research being conducted in Nevada will inform providers and patients? And of course, this really important conversation for all of us.
Yes, thank you, Senator Rosen. As your neighbor in Utah, I'm very familiar with the demographics that you described, which are very similar in Utah as they are here, as they are for you in Nevada, and also the very rural nature of our 2 states. You've raised a very important aspect of needs for research to expand to these areas. I mentioned earlier in my response to Senator Warren, to Senator Collins, with the support for the geriatric workforce enhancement programs. One of the things that we have been funded to do through our GWEP is to reach out across the state and provide education and support for staff in long-term care settings across the state of Utah. This includes an outreach to the tribal nations in Utah. There are 7 tribes in Utah, and an important outreach to Native Americans in addressing the health disparities and their risks for cognitive impairment and dementia. The other thing I brought up earlier is one of the unintended consequences of benefit of COVID is that our ability to deliver telehealth resources to rural areas has really stepped up in the last year and opened up an opportunity. That carries with it a need, and perhaps the request in that respect is to, as I know you would resonate with, is to better support broadband access to rural communities so that those telehealth deliveries can be given. The other aspect, and Mrs. Lehmeyer spoke to this in terms of support groups, being able to deliver distance support groups, which we're doing through our GWEP program in Utah, to disseminate the supports and the care that's needed across the state to rural areas is another aspect of research that could be further expanded. So very important issue. And I think as your neighbor, we can work very closely with your investigators in the University of Nevada and others to make those advances.
Well, I look forward to that. And I want to just add to that a little bit about respite care and how important it is for those caregivers. Caregiving's a never-ending job, 24/7. It's oftentimes thankless. It's finding respite care is burdensome, costly. It can feel guilty for the family members who feel that they need even a weekend off. And so, I only have a few seconds. So, Ms. Lehmeyer, a lot of caregivers face fatigue and burnout, and so could expanding access to respite care, how do you think it might help prevent elder abuse and just improve our caregiving as you might see that?
Yes, we see so much stress in our caregivers and through our support groups and such, and we're always offering seminars or little workshops on managing stress, and through our Powerful Tools for Caregiver classes that are now over at the University of Utah from Oregon. But we see the stress on these caregivers just kind of melt away once they find out that they can really take time to take care of themselves. Just like that oxygen mask on the airplane, who do you put it on first? And so we really try to educate our caregivers about the need to take care of themselves. Being able to access vouchers and through our Respite Coalition or through the area agencies on agings for caregivers to be able to take a weekend off and have someone hired or pay a family member to, through those vouchers to be able to go into the home and stay with the family so the caregiver can get a break. Even the 4 hours that they are here at the ARC, the caregivers are just see the value and they feel so relieved when they come to pick their loved one up in the afternoon and know that they've had a good time and the caregiver has had a break away. So that respite time is just so important for these caregivers, and also the education that we are able to provide through our workshops and things.
Well, thank you all for your work. We all care about our families and our parents and grandparents, and we all live better, longer, whether it's Alzheimer's or other kinds of chronic diseases that may come along with aging, and supporting our families who we all love each other. We want to take care of each other. That's really important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosen, thanks very much. I want to thank you for appearing at our hearing today, and I'll close out with just some brief comments today. First of all, I want to thank Ranking Member Scott, and as he mentioned, our staffs who made this hearing possible. Also want to thank, of course, our witnesses for their testimony and their insights. I think Ranking Member Scott made an excellent point earlier when he talked about how capable and dedicated and experienced this witness panel was. We're certainly grateful for that when we're discussing these important issues that relate to Alzheimer's and dementia generally. As we lift the shroud of this pandemic, we also have to think about how we can bolster supports for those afflicted with Alzheimer's disease. And of course, that support also is support for their families. We can't leave them behind as we head toward recovery. I believe that the American Rescue Plan has made great strides towards ensuring that people with disabilities and older adults can access services that help them live full and meaningful lives. Congress should also pass the American Jobs Plan to spur economic growth and strengthen both our physical infrastructure as well as our human infrastructure so we can provide help to families. I was noting earlier, and I didn't make reference to it, but wanted to make reference to one line from Mrs. Montanez's statement. She said, and I'm quoting at the end of her testimony, Caitlin, you said, quote, "I am here as a daughter, niece, and granddaughter of Alzheimer's," unquote. So when we talk about these initiatives to help families and the upcoming opportunities, we're of course thinking about families like hers. And we're grateful that each of our witnesses was willing to come and provide the benefit of your experience, the benefit of your family's experience, and of course the benefit of your scholarship and work in this area, and you've enlightened all of us. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Scott, and then I'll just have some brief comments at the end. Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, for your dedication to this really important topic, and to the Alzheimer's Association, your stakeholders around the country. Thank you all for tuning in and spurring action on behalf of Congress. This is, as I said at the beginning, not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is not even a bipartisan issue. This is an American issue. This is a global issue that we have an opportunity to lead on. And to the two caregivers on the panel, thank you both. And for Peg Laymeyer from my great state of South Carolina, God bless you for your work, your dedication, frankly, your story. And Caitlin, we certainly learned a lot listening to the impact that Alzheimer's has had on your life and so many others. Dr. Manley, I think you have done a really good job of pointing out the disparity within the Alzheimer's disease itself. 57% African Americans have a 57% more chance of being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And 63% of the folks diagnosed in my state of South Carolina have been women. And so we are going to focus our attention on making sure that we focus on diversity in the trials that we're seeing in many of the drugs that are coming forward, because that is a really important component, and one that I talked about during the pandemic for the COVID vaccine is critically important in Alzheimer's as well. And I think that there's a lot that we can do, that we should do, and I think that if we get it done, we'll see the kind of results that we need that bend that curve in the communities that are most fragile and economically strapped. I'd also like to say that protecting our intellectual property protections is so important for us to continue to see one of America's greatest assets, our IP, continue to deliver more and more solutions and hopefully therapies for Alzheimer's. It's one of the areas that we are a global leader, and we need to maintain that biomedical innovation that is creating solutions for the world's greatest diseases. And in short, innovation of this sort is an incredibly high reward proposition, but it's also high risk. We need to do everything in our power that we can to encourage the dynamism and the all hands on deck approach that we've seen from the pandemic. And if we could transfer that to Alzheimer's, I think we find solutions faster. The one thing I've learned about when this country comes together to fight back the greatest healthcare attack we've seen in my lifetime, we get things done faster than ever. Literally having a vaccine in less than a year, something that was said to be impossible to do, yet we had it done. If we had the same energy and synergy towards Alzheimer's, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe we could have similar results in unbelievable time, whatever that is. I think with y'all's expertise and frankly with the pain of your stories, we can move forward together in finding solutions. Chairman, thank you again for leading on this hearing, and I look forward to your final thoughts.
Ranking Member Scott, thanks very much, and thank you for your work. I also want to thank again our witnesses for their time today and also the expertise and passion they bring to these issues. If any senators have additional questions for the record or statements to be added, the hearing record will be open for 7 days until next Thursday, May 27th. So thank you all for participating today, and this concludes our hearing.